Thank you for joining today's webinar on color volume. We're hoping that this webinar will be interesting and informative for everyone that watches. Hosting today's webinar is Tyler Pruitt, our technical liaison, and myself, Josh
Hello.
Palmer. Before we get into color volume, I just want to give a brief introduction to our company, SpectraCal and Portrait Displays. So last year, Portrait Displays actually acquired SpectraCal, and today we've been combining our teams further and further to deliver some of the best OEM and end-user calibration and color management solutions for many different manufacturers and industries across the board. So Tyler, do you want to give a introduction to color volume? Let's start from there.
Yeah, so what color volume is, historically we used to only measure a color gamut at a certain luminance level. But with the advent of HDR, taking that kind of metric doesn't really tell you all there is to know about the performance of a display. So what color volume is instead of just measuring what the primaries or what the color gamut coverage is at one single luminance level, essentially we're measuring the whole color volume, the edge of the color space, but at a whole bunch of different luminance levels, and then calculating the volume of the internal shell, or the volume of what's inside of that shell. And there's actually two different metrics for color volume. One is called CIE Lab, and the other one is called ICTCP. So I'll get into detail more, but that's just a little overview. So color volume is a new metric to evaluate the performance of HDR displays. In theory, you could measure an SDR display, but almost every single one of them hits Rec 709 and 100 nits, so essentially all of them would have 100% color volume. But when we're talking about HDR, it gives you a picture of the performance of the different price points in TVs and different technologies.
Cool. So do you want to get into a little bit on CalMan and the CalMan release timing?
Yeah, so we just released CalMan 2017. It's the first release that has our color volume workflow. And our color volume workflow allows you to both measure CIE Lab volume and the ICTCP color volume method. So first I'm going to talk about CIE Lab. So in the workflow, which we'll show a screenshot in a second, you pick either relative mode or an absolute mode for CIE Lab. Now, relative mode takes the peak luminance of that individual display. We measure the 100% white, and we take that, and we then compare the display's performance against a theoretically perfect display with the same peak luminance. Also, we have something called absolute mode, where instead of measuring the actual display's peak and comparing against that, we have nit levels that you can select. So 540, 1000, 2000, 4000, 10,000, and then you're comparing the display you're measuring the color volume of against a theoretically perfect 1000 nit display or 4000 nit display. So there's two different metrics, trying to tell you two different things. One thing to be aware of is there's no HDR standard for measuring color volume. That's why there is several different ways to measure it, and they each give you a little bit different picture of the performance of the display. The other method is called ICTCP, and ICTCP is a color space that was invented by Dolby. I think they were working with RIT's color science department on it, and what their color volume does, instead of giving you like a percentage of P3, it calculates how many distinguishable colors the display can do. Because there's a lot, like with 10-bit, in theory, there's 1 billion colors that you could represent on the screen with different code values. But a lot of those colors to a human look exactly the same. Like a really bright red and one code value off would probably look exactly the same to most humans. So what the ICTCP color volume does is it uses some of their color science that says these are the noticeable differences between all the colors in the color volume, and you're essentially counting how many just noticeable difference colors the display can do. And the abbreviation is called MDC, millions of distinguishable colors. So for example, a lot of the 2017 HDR displays are in the 300 million distinguishable colors range. I think if you had a 10,000 nit display that did P3, it would be something like 900 million. So it's kind of an interesting way to measure how many actual distinguishable colors you can do. But the downside is it doesn't tell you if it's outside of the color gamut the content is. So these two different color volumes kind of tell you different things, and one isn't necessarily better than the other one. They just are a different metric. And we've provided both. We're not trying to say one is better than the other. We're just giving you guys the tools to measure color volume in the way that the industry is going towards these two different methods. With the CIE Lab method, we do support something called our Color Volume Visualizer app, because really we're looking at 3D volume, so we want to be able to see what the color performance of the display is in actually 3D. So we wrote a separate app called the Color Volume Visualizer, and what that does is it allows you to take the CIE Lab measurements, export them, and import them into this visualizer, which will display them in three dimensions, and you can compare it to a shell of, say, P3 or 2020, and it's kind of a cool, you can drag your mouse around to see at different angles. We're working on some enhancements to that. We can't really talk about them yet because they haven't been announced, but we have some cool features coming to the visualizer soon. So the color volume workflow, it's in it's in Home Enthusiast, it's in Video Pro, Calman Video Pro, Calman Studio, and Calman Ultimate. So it's really something that everybody can start to play with and measure their own display. It's not really related to calibration, but it's more of like a performance metric. And so the TV reviewers are starting to use it, and R&D at the TV manufacturers are starting to use it just to see how their displays stack up against everybody else's in the industry. So we think this is the new metric for HDR TVs, where before it was what's your gamut coverage, but nobody said what luminance level they measured that at. And just because you have a bright peak white, that doesn't mean that all the colors will perform like that. So this is a way to just give like an overall view of the HDR performance of a display. Now, I think the other thing we're going to talk about today is Calman 2017 new features besides color volume. So one of the first ones is Samsung QLED AutoCal support. So really, one of the things that made Calman famous, at least in the home theater market, is AutoCal. One of the most painful and really repetitive tasks during a calibration is going into the menu, into the multi-point grayscale or two-point grayscale controls and doing them by hand. And another factor that makes it even worse is HDR. A lot of the times, if you have any menu on screen, it affects the readings. So you can't even bring up a menu and in real time do a read continuous and make adjustments because of the fact that having a menu up on the screen affects the actual measurements. So what AutoCal does is it takes the tedious, repetitive going into the menus over and over with the remote part of calibration away. It just simplifies the thing. I know a lot of pro calibrators, maybe they don't use AutoCal, but even if you don't use the AutoCal part, you still have what we call DDC, or direct display control, where all the calibration controls in the TV are accessible via a menu and just a mouse click away. So even if you don't use the AutoCal and you want to tweak things yourself and get it exactly how you would like it, you can do it by just a click of the mouse instead of going into the menu. So we support all the Samsung QLED models, the Q7, the Q8, and the Q9. You do need a serial cable that plugs into the One Connect box on the Samsung TVs. We have information in our user guide for the Samsung AutoCal setup. We have links to where you can buy the cable. It's just essentially a DB9 or serial cable on one end and a 3.5 millimeter headphone jack male on the other, and you plug it into the One Connect box, plug the serial cable in to your most likely a USB to serial adapter, because not a lot of computers these days have native serial ports, especially laptops. One thing to be aware of with if you've ever used a USB to serial adapter, there's two chipsets that are out there. One is FTDI, one is Prolific. The FTDIs are usually more expensive, and it's because they're a lot more reliable. There's certain things that certain industries can get away with some error correction and stuff, but when we're sending a bunch of commands at a time, we've seen issues with the Prolific chipset. So if you're buying a USB to serial adapter, make sure you get one that has the FTDI chipset if you want to use it with CalMan for AutoCal of the Samsung TVs. Another thing is we added an HLG workflow to CalMan, and HLG stands for Hybrid Log Gamma. It's a high dynamic range electro-optical transfer function. And what an electro-optical transfer function is, some people would call it a gamma curve. But since a gamma curve talks about a single exponent, a single curve that is non-changing, the HDR ones are not like that. So that's why we call it an electro-optical transfer function. And what that means is we take the content, the bits, and we turn it back from electrical signals back into light, so electro-optical. So we're turning it back into light with the TV. And the inverse of that would be an opto-electrical transfer function, and that's what a camera has in it. So the camera has the opposite, and the display has an electro-optical. So HLG stands for Hybrid Log Gamma. And what that is something that the NHK, National Broadcaster of Japan, and the BBC invented. The reason they did that is because of the fact that the other HDR technologies require metadata, and they thought that for live broadcasting, it would be better to have something that did not require metadata. So essentially what Hybrid Log Gamma is it's a gamma curve at the bottom, and then as it gets to the specular highlights, the really bright HDR stuff, it turns into a logarithmic curve like a camera would shoot for log video in like movie production. So it's a hybrid of gamma and log. That's Hybrid Log Gamma. They probably should have, maybe HLG sounded better than HGL. But there's not a lot of content in it yet. There's some trials, but it's probably once these TV broadcasters and satellite and cable providers start doing live HDR of sports and stuff, that's when I think we're going to see HLG come into prominence. Almost all of the 2017 TVs have HLG. I know some of the manufacturers have added it to the 2016 models. CalMan supports HLG with the pattern generators. Most of the pattern generators, if not all of them, that support HDR10 in CalMan also support HLG now with CalMan 2017. And now we have a new workflow to go along with that. We've had HLG in CalMan for over a year, maybe 2 years, just because we try to put in the standards right when they come out. So when TV manufacturers and people are doing R&D, they already have something to measure against, even though it's not in the consumer hands yet. So we've had HLG in there for a while, but you had to manually configure it in a workflow, which is something that some people that do R&D are, they are able to do that easily. But we wanted to make a workflow for calibration and measurement of HLG. So it's essentially the HDR10 workflow with some modifications. But yeah, that's in CalMan 2017. And the next thing that we added is something called a broadcast monitor workflow. Now this is in CalMan Ultimate and CalMan Studio. And what this is a lot of people in the studio market, they have a lot of broadcast monitors or reference monitors that you have to manually calibrate with the menus, but they really only have like a 2-point white balance control and stuff like that. So they wanted a simplified workflow that was specifically targeted towards broadcast monitors, just to make it simple. They didn't have to skip any steps that don't apply to them. So we created a broadcast monitor workflow just to simplify their calibration processes. So that's in CalMan Studio and CalMan Ultimate. The next thing that's in CalMan 2017 is our new Dolby Vision workflow. It's a Dolby Vision custom workflow. Now, we previously had a Dolby Vision workflow that was intended to work with the Vizio TVs, but we worked with Dolby and LG on a new process that makes the calibration easier and doesn't require a golden reference file. This process is brand new. We spent almost a year working on this. Essentially what happens is there's a new set of Dolby Vision metadata. The original ones we called perceptual metadata because the TV would treat it as just like regular content and do its color volume remapping or tone mapping. The way this is different is all the TVs currently still are gamma based. So at the panel level, there's still a gamma based panel, and then the HDR is mapped onto that. So what this new metadata does, and this is supported in the Meridio 6G pattern generator and the new VideoForge Pro from SpectraCal, is there's something called absolute metadata, Dolby Vision metadata, and relative. What relative mode does is tells the Dolby Vision engine in the television, bypass all your mapping, just display the content or display the patterns directly to the panel with no processing. So what that allows us to do is then calibrate the underlying panel perfectly, so then all of the Dolby Vision mapping that happens on top of it is as intended. So the Dolby Vision mapping engine is expecting a 2.2 gamma curve on the panel at its native level. And as we know, they don't spend very much time calibrating panels at the factory, or else they would cost, $10,000 or more for a 55-inch probably. So they don't have time to do a crazy calibration at the factory. So what you see is when you put the TV, the 2017 LG OLED, into relative mode, it doesn't really perfectly follow 2.2 gamma. In fact, it's more like 2.4 gamma at the bottom and then 2.2 gamma towards the top of the curve. So what you do is, after you enable this relative mode, is you use the regular 2-point and 20-point white balance controls in the TV to make the TV perfect 2.2 gamma and D65. Then after that is perfect, or as perfect as you can get it, you then create what's called a Dolby Vision configuration file. And the way this works is at CalMan, you click the button in the new Dolby Vision custom workflow. It reads white, black, red, green, blue, the primaries and the peak and the minimum of the display, puts that into a file along with some fancy math. You take that file, you plug it into the TV via a USB stick, play a piece of Dolby Vision content, and it will ask you, do you want to load a custom Dolby Vision configuration file? And then you say yes, and then essentially you have, as calibrated as possible, the Dolby Vision mode of the TV. Now, there is a Dolby Vision configuration file already in every single Dolby Vision TV, but it has to be like a generic one based on like a whole lot or a run of TVs, or maybe just every single TV has the same one. So it doesn't really take into account panel variants. Some panels might be brighter, some might be limited. So really, the people that had brighter panels weren't taking advantage of those. The people that had darker panels could get some clipping in. So with this custom configuration file, you're getting the most performance possible out of your specific panel and TV that you have in Dolby Vision. So CalMan's built-in pattern generator and PC output does support these new metadata, but you have to send a specific info frame to the TV to tell it is Dolby Vision, and the computer cannot do that. So we are working on another solution. It's not ready yet. So you can the people that have already set up their computer to do Dolby Vision out of the HDMI output will be able to use it with these LGs. But currently, we don't have that solution ready. So the only pattern generators you can use are the new VideoForge Pro from SpectraCal and the Meridio 6G with the latest firmware. The next thing we want to talk about is we've added AutoCal also to the Panasonic 2017 OLED. Now, these are not available in the US. I think they're available in Europe, Asia, and in Canada for some reason. It's essentially the same type of AutoCal that we've supported Panasonic through since, I think, the 2011 VT25 Plasma. So every year we've supported their AutoCal, but starting last year we added HDR support for AutoCal, and we've just taken that through to this year, and so we support HDR and SDR AutoCal of the Panasonic. which we also on the Samsung support HDR10 and SDR AutoCal on them as well. The next thing we want to talk about is our new meter. We added support for this. It's the SpectraCal C6 HDR 2000. Now the original C6 HDR, it supported up to 1300 nits. The new device, it's new hardware. Our manufacturing partner supplied us with new hardware where we can read up to 2000 nits now. So we have a trade-in program that I think is going until the end of the month, I think.
End of August. Yeah.
Okay, the end of August.
Or middle of August.
So we have a trade-in program where you can trade in your C6 or another meter to get a discount on it.
And that's really important too, because the new TVs that are coming out are
they're getting brighter and brighter. Essentially, there's a nit war. It's going to be the new thing where we have this large of color volume, we have this brightness. Because remember, some of the content has been mastered at 4,000 nits. So as TVs get better and better on that content, you'll get closer and closer to what the mastering display looked like. So essentially, say you have a 1,000 nit TV today, in 3 years maybe you have a 4,000 nit TV, and now you can go back to the content that was mastered at 4,000 nits and get that extra benefit without having to buy the disc again. So as things are getting brighter and brighter, we need measurement devices that get brighter and brighter and support higher and higher luminances. Mm-hmm. So we had a couple people send in some questions. The first one was, give us more details on this VideoForge Pro and what functionality it has. So the VideoForge Pro has all the calibration functionality as the Meridio 6G, and really when people ask us what's the difference, why would you buy a 6G over a VideoForge Pro or vice versa? Well, if you only need to do calibration, the VideoForge Pro is fine for you. The 6G has a lot of custom integrators functionality. Like it can work with a matching called the 6A analyzer, where you can test cables over long runs and make sure it will do the whole 18 gigabits a second HDMI 2.0 signal over your HDMI cables. It also has a bunch of patterns that are for integrators and just some functionality that isn't calibration. So if you need that, if you're an integrator and you need all that extra functionality, the 6G would be perfect for you. If you just need calibration, then the VideoForge Pro will cover your needs. And like I said, calibration-wise in CalMan, they both have the same functionality, including the new Dolby Vision metadata. So one other question we got is what's up with the new product mix? So essentially, we've only have one home product now, Home Enthusiast. It's just because that's what like 99% of people would buy. We do have an upgrade program. So if you have one of the other home versions, contact us. Also, in our business section, now we just have what we're calling Video Pro. And it's kind of like Pro and Expert kind of combined and had a child. It has functionality for video walls, 3D LUTs for home devices, and then on the studio side, we still have Studio, and then we have Ultimate. So if you're an integrator or an AV Pro, you'd want the Video Pro version of CalMan. If you're a studio and you're doing post-production and stuff like that, you want the Studio, and if the functionality in there isn't enough for you, then both people have the upgrade path to Ultimate. So Ultimate is everything that we do in CalMan. It supports every piece of hardware, every workflow. It has the Netflix workflows in there, which is only available in Ultimate. It also includes design mode. And now what design mode is, it allows you to build your own workflows and reports. And this is a super powerful tool. Not a lot of people understand how it works, but we do have a design mode guide now. It allows you to build your own workflow, and you don't need any programming experience. It's drag and drop of graphs, and you tell it where you want to get your data, and you can do custom branding and make CalMan look like a new piece of software just for you. You can also load other people's workflows that have created them and posted them online, and also you can create your own reports. A couple of other features that not a lot of people know about in CalMan Ultimate is we have a command line version of CalMan it's called CalMan Console. So in research and development and in manufacturing and people want to just grab a ton of data or just measure these exact patches. And we have a Calman console command line app where you feed in a text file of what patches you want to read, and it runs, and then it spits out a text file of the results. Now, why would you? It's just an easy way and very low overhead. So we've used it internally to read like 33,000 patches on one TV just to kind of model it and run some simulations against it. So it's very powerful. You can take a ton of readings. You don't have to worry about running out of memory because you're reading thousands and thousands and thousands of patches. So Calman Ultimate is essentially everything we offer, plus it has a lot of powerful features that not a lot of people even know about, like design mode and the console app. So if you would like any questions or you'd like to upgrade from Video Pro or another version to Ultimate, contact our sales department. They'd be happy to help you with that. And so I think we want to talk a little bit about where you can find more information and what trade shows you can see at us at upcoming.
Yeah. So like Tyler said, if you have any more questions, feel free to email them in. Customer service at portrait.com or sales at SpectraCal.com. Many of us are on both aliases. Some of the trade shows that we're going to be doing in the upcoming months are CEDIA in San Diego.
And that's in September.
Yep.
So that's
September
the
7th
AV integrator home theater market.
Yes.
We'll have a lot of visibility. We're not going to have a booth there, but we're going to be around at other people's booths, and I'm going to be doing some speaking engagements. So we'll probably be pushing out emails, giving you all the information. If you're going to attend CEDIA, remember, who doesn't want to go to San Diego? So should be well attended. So if you're going to be there, stop by and say hi at one of the booths we're at. The next thing, we're also going to be at the SMPTE show in October in Hollywood. We will have a booth there, and that is like all the video engineer nerds from Hollywood.
Before SMPTE too, we're going to be at IBC in Amsterdam. We'll have a small booth there as well. So please stop if you're in Europe or you're commuting from Asia to Europe. Please stop by and visit us there as well.
And like I said, watch your email. We'll be sending out more information about those trade shows and how you can get a one-on-one with us. We usually have at least one tech person or engineer there, so we can get into the weeds on the math and of everything behind Calman. It's just not a bunch of salespeople, so a lot of people come by just to get their specific questions answered in real time at the trade show. So, and if we can't answer it, we'll get a hold of one of our engineers to answer your questions.
Sure.
So, I think that wraps it up. Email any questions in you have or post questions to the YouTube stream. And we're also going to be posting the video, if you want to send it to a colleague, to our Facebook page or back to YouTube. So, if you want to share this webinar with somebody else that you think might be beneficial for them to see it. So thank you very much, and don't forget, subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're going to be adding a bunch of new videos and tutorials for all these new functionality in Calman 2017. So I'll be walking through and giving you details and giving you all the information, because people learn different. Not everybody likes to read a PDF to learn how to do something. So thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you soon.
Right. Bye.